Hello everyone. In this session, we are going to learn how to use AWS cfn-init in your CloudFormation templates and how to quickly debug errors related to cfn-init. So what's the agenda for today? We are going to learn what cfn-init is, where is cfn-init in your Windows machines, and how to use it in your AWS CloudFormation template. We will quickly learn the first three topics and then spend more time on how to quickly debug cfn-init related commands. The emphasis of this presentation is the quick rundown around how to quickly or increase your productivity when you are building functions related to cfn-init. So what is cfn-init? cfn-init is a kind of a utility function that allows you to execute some commands inside your EC2 instances when it starts with CloudFormation. When CloudFormation runs, it knows different AWS resources that it orchestrates. For example, if you create a VPC, if you create an EC2 instance, if you create EBS volumes or S3 buckets, CloudFormation knows those resources. But if you want to install some software inside your EC2 instance, maybe you want to set up some configuration files, download some software, install a few software inside your application, that information is usually not visible to CloudFormation. Your instance will start and the CloudFormation will think that your instance has successfully started, but it has no clue around what software got installed inside your EC2 instance. cfn-init allows you to execute software as part of the CloudFormation provisioning. So what it allows you to do is it acts as a proxy in between CloudFormation and your software installation. So let's go for an example and then understand how this can be used in your CloudFormation templates. Here I have a very simple CloudFormation template. All what this CloudFormation template doing is deploying an EC2 instance. Here you can find some parameters, so that includes things like the instance type. I also have the AMI ID where I take it from SSM store. So this is an easy way that you can refer to the latest AMI ID. So I take all these parameters and I'm going to create a very simple EC2 instance called DevMachine. So that's the resource ID. As you can see, it's an type of AWS EC2 instance. When I run this machine, when this get provisioned as part of the CloudFormation execution, I want to install some software inside this. And this is where the cfn-init comes handy. So in the properties section, I have all the configuration for that. For the image ID, I refer to the image ID here, which I take it from the SSM parameter store. I have some tags defined. I also have the instance type that identifies what kind of EC2 instance is going to be. So in this case, it's going to be T3 large or C5 instance. The subnet, I'm going to provision it. So subnet, I take it from a previously executed CloudFormation template. But the important thing here is the user data section. So in the user data section, I of course have a fixed password that I take it from the CloudFormation template and set it. And I execute a few PowerShell commands to initialize this instance. But then I have another command called cfn-init-exe, and I pass it a few parameters into that. So when you are calling cfn-init, you can call it from your user data section of your application. In this case, this is a Windows instance, so I'm using the PowerShell commands. But I'm executing this cfn-init function. I'm going to make it verbal, so I get a lot of debug output in my logs. This is very important when you are debugging. And then I pass the config sets. So this config set, this mark as C, points into a section in your metadata, right? So when cfn-init runs, you need to provide few parameters. One is what is the stack ID, and which resource that it should look for this config set. So in this case, I'm pointing to the current stack ID where this instance is running. And the resource I'm going to look at is DevMachine. So that points into this resource that I have. And then I specify which region, which is in this case is going to be the region I'm writing this CloudFormation template. So what will happen is when this function runs, this user data runs, it will execute this function. It will pass this config set stack ID. It can then look at this metadata section and look for the config section. So if you go into the metadata of this EC2 instance, you will find that I have defined a config set. So here I have a config set called config. So the name I have given here, config, corresponds to this config. So this can be any arbitrary name. So this can be, for example, my config. So if you specify this one as my config, this parameter you are passing also has to be my config. So what will happen is that cfn-init is going to read this config and then going to execute these config sets that I have defined here. You can have, as you can see, that this is an array of configs, so you can have multiple commands. Also, this config set, you can have multiple configs. So you can have config 1, config 2, config 3. You can have a comma separated values. And depending on your requirements, you can call which config set that you want to execute. For example, if you have, let's say, config 1 here and another config 2 here, and you decide you are going to execute config 2, in your cfn-init function here, you specify as config 2. So once you do that, as part of this provisioning, it's going to execute these commands, and it's going to execute these commands in this order. So in this case, I have some prerequisites. This can be any arbitrary name. I just use prerequisites to specify the prerequisites. These are just files that it's going to create. You don't necessarily need to have these cfn hub or hooks. So in this case, for example, I'm going to download some installers and then put it here. So let's look at this simple example. So here I want to have an installer, AWS CLI v2, and I want to download it from this URL. So what I will do is that it will download from this URL and then save it to a location called C installers AWS CLI v2. So this is, you can specify the source if your content is in a web location. Alternatively, you can create it dynamically on the fly. So in this case, CFN hub, what I do is I create a file. So this is not something that I'm going to download, but I specify the content on the spot. So here you can see the content. It's a string. So what will happen is the content will have something called main and then stack equals some parameters. So this is an easy way that you can dynamically create files with some parameters that you pass into the CloudFormation template. All these references you can refer into parameters or some pseudo parameters that CloudFormation provides by default. So here I create like 3 files, no, actually 4 files. So I have CFN, hooks, installers, and some other files that I'm going to create here. So this is the files. So the prerequisite is going to download these files, and also I'm going to execute some commands. These commands can be any arbitrary, so you can define any number of commands here. Important thing to remember is the order of execution is alphabetical order. So easy way to like make sure that your commands get executed in the right order is to make sure that you put some kind of a number like this. So I execute few commands. Here I have something called a command PowerShell. I'm going to execute some PowerShell commands. So in this case, I'm actually installing Chocolatey, right? So it's up to you to decide what kind of commands you are executing, but in this case, I'm installing Chocolatey. So that's command number 1. You can define after completion what will happen. So this is usually useful if you are restarting the machine. This installation of Chocolatey does not require restarting. So it will not wait once this command executes. And then I have a couple of other commands, one to configure Chocolatey, like some other PowerShell scripts that I'm running here. So I have all the scripts defined here. So what will happen is the cfn-init is going to execute this command in order. So make sure, like, this is an easy way to use, if you use fn function join and then you specify them with the command, you can use the CloudFormation in the same way that you are writing this command in a text file. And then I have some other programs that I'm installing. So it's the same pattern. You can see that you can keep it into different sections. You don't need to have all these sections. So here I have another one called signal complete. So all what I'm doing here is signal that the resource has been successfully created, right? So what will happen is that if all these commands executed successfully, the final one is going to be signal complete. As I said before, this can be any name. So I just use signal complete here. So I specify signal complete. So all these commands will run in order. And the final one, I'm going to inform the CloudFormation that all this execution has been successfully completed. So here I have something called cfn signal with the error level, and then specify this resource has successfully created. So let's provision this CloudFormation template and then see how this gets executed, and then check how to debug this solution. Remember, when I started this presentation, the goal of this presentation is to explain you how to do this debugging quickly. So part of that debugging quickly process involves quickly provisioning this EC2 instance and then making modification and redeploying. To make life easy, I have only one CloudFormation template with only one resource. So you can see that as of now, my focus is only on this machine that I'm developing. So in my CloudFormation template, I have only that resource. All the resources that this machine depends on, I provision as a dependency network and then refer to them. An example of that one is, if you look at these properties, you can see that the subnet ID is coming from a CloudFormation that I have provisioned previously. So I have a CloudFormation templates, for example, that deploys the network. So this provision all the VPCs, the subnets, the security groups. And once it provisioned that, I'm going to output all those parameters. As you can see, I have output the VPC, the subnet. So these values I refer in my development test one. The advantage of that one is when I deploy this CloudFormation during the debugging or testing, I can quickly provision it without provisioning all the other dependent resources. I have a parameter here called DevSetupNetworkStackName, and it points into an already provisioned CloudFormation stack that has things like the network. So here you can find that when I refer to things like the subnet ID, I always refer to that output parameter called my dev public subnet with the DevSetup-NetworkStackName as the previous name. So you can see that when I output the network, I output the subnet 1 as the stack name plus the name of the parameter that I want to output. So I refer to that one in my test or the debugging CloudFormation template. So that's one productivity improvement I have done. And also the other one is setting up the Windows password. You can always like use a key pair and then do that, but this is, remember, this is for debugging purpose. Later we will remove all these parameters, but having this one hard-coded allows me to quickly log in into this machine during the debugging time. As you can see, I pass the password as the main password that I capture here, and the password is also hard-coded. And you can see that the things like instance type, they are all like I have a default value. So if you specify the default value, then when you run it next time, you know your clicks are going to be faster. You can quickly deploy them. Another quick productivity improvement you can do is, instead of manually going there and then trying to provision this CloudFormation template, usually have a PowerShell or command line up and running so that you can deploy it. As you can see, I have the DevSetup-Network already provisioned, and this has provisioned resources like the network, all the internet security groups, internet gateways, routing tables. As part of this one, it has already output some parameters, which I'm going to use in my testing CloudFormation template. So when you are testing this CloudFormation template, you can always go to create stack, upload template, choose this one. You can browse to the file you have, go to next, give it a name. Let's call test1. And so this is the advantage of having those default parameters. Now it already knows what are things, so you can quickly do the next, so that you don't need to spend time filling them, right? Now, you can always do this upload and testing, but during a real CloudFormation development, it's not easy because you'll be doing this one in multiple times. So instead, the recommended approach is to use command line to deploy this CloudFormation template. So here are some tips to speed up your development time. So the first thing I do is I read the CloudFormation template to a variable in my PowerShell with get content. Linux, it can be a different one. So I read the value. So I have this value in my variable. So every time when you update it, you can now quickly refer to this variable when you try to deploy it. So now let's clean this one. So I have my value in the variable. I already have a credentials profile saved, so I'm going to set AWS credentials, and I'm going to use profile name as POC1, which I have used here. So that will change the credentials I'm going to use for this PowerShell session. And the next thing is to run the CloudFormation template. So let's run this CloudFormation template, and remember the variable C points into the value I read a moment ago. So that will deploy the CloudFormation template. Now, once I have this set up, the subsequent execution are super easy. All what I need to do is to get this content and then update the CFN stack. As you can see, my CloudFormation got deployed very quickly. Now, this is really cool thing. Now, only thing I need to do is to now focus on my EC2 instance. So let's go into my EC2 instance. So I have one EC2 instance that is running. So this is the one that we have focused. So let's wait until it gets initialized. If you enjoyed this video so far, please thumbs up this video and subscribe to my channel, and it will help me immensely to grow this channel and continuously produce awesome cloud related videos. Now remember, when we ran this, there are a few content in the user metadata. If you want to check what that user metadata is, you can go here and then check instance settings, and if you go edit user data, you will find the content I have specified in my CloudFormation stack, the cfn-init one. So once that instance starts, to make life easy, we are not going to restart and rerun this CloudFormation again and again. What we are going to do is to execute this cfn-init one after updating the CloudFormation template. So that's where the cool things comes. So you don't need to necessarily provision the EC2 instance again and again to execute this cfn-init. You can run this one inside the instance as many times you want to get the latest update into your EC2 instance. So my instance has started. Let's directly remote login into that. So connecting to that RDP client. Now, because we have a username that I have defined or hard-coded in my CloudFormation template, you cannot get the password. You can just type it after downloading this remote desktop connection. So that will speed up your development time. So I have logged into my EC2 instance that I started with the help of CloudFormation template. As you can see that you cannot find some of the files that it's supposed to create as part of this execution. Now remember, cfn-init takes some time to create these files. So if you try to access them immediately, you will not have access. So a good recommendation for this one is to change the password after all the execution, or to do a reset after all the execution. That will make sure that the users cannot log in into this machine before the cfn-init completes. The next obvious question is, where is this cfn-init exe file? So if you go into your C program files, you have a folder called Amazon, and there's something called cfn bootstrap. So here you can find all the cfn related functions or the exes. So one of that one is cfn-init. So when you run the user data, so this is what that get executed as part of that execution. The logs for this one is available under, if you go into C, once the cfn-init get executed, it will create a folder called cfn, and there you will find the logs. So as of now, we are still waiting for it to execute. We'll come back to here after it has already executed. Seems like it executed some of the commands. As you can see that it created the Visual Studio Code. And also it created some of the files that I wanted. So here it's a problem of me not waiting long enough for this cfn to run. So you can see that it created a few folders. One is cfn, and here you can find the logs. So if there's any issues running this, you need to look at this cfn-init log file. So if I go into this one, you can see some of the configurations that it has run. It's installed the Chocolatey, which is successful. And it has created some files, all good. Moving into one, that's also good. Some installation of VS Code, that's also successful. And it's running some of the installation. So as you can see, there is a problem here. So one of the problem is that this 03 test 1 failed. So it may be some command error. So this is the command that I typed when I ran it, and it failed. Debug command new item. So this already exists. So of course this is error that got because I'm trying to create a file that already exists, and that's why it threw that error. So this is a PowerShell error. So let's correct this and then see how we can quickly deploy this. Let's say that I don't want this run test2 command altogether, right? So let's update this CloudFormation template to remove this one completely. So I remove that completely, and then to update this CloudFormation template, all what I need to do is to go to my I want to make sure that I update my content with the latest saved file. Then I'm going to run an update. Now, as you can see, I made a mistake. The name of the stack is test1. So I'll update the CFN stack. So that will update the CFN stack. As you can see, it has updated the CFN stack here, but it still keeps the EC2 instance running. So this is the same instance that I used before. So you don't need to go through that long process of starting this instance. It only updates the metadata section. So here, as you can see that I updated only the metadata section, right? So the instance stays as it is. All what I need to do next is to go there and then execute the CFN to check whether it works. So this may not work when I try to run it again because it's now going to update, install Visual Studio Code again, but let's run this one. So now this is going to go there and then refer to the same CloudFormation template, point into this machine, and then refer to the updated version. So in the updated version, you can see that if you go into the dev machine metadata section, you can clearly see that there's nothing called test2. So that part of the CloudFormation template is removed. So let's go here and then run this cfn-init. So I can test the next set of commands. So it may be that you are going to add new commands into this. So cfn-init will run. If there's any other issues, it will throw again. So this way you can easily check cfn-init. So you don't necessarily need to wait until you run the full CloudFormation to execute cfn-init. During your debugging process, all what you need to do is to first provision your EC2 instance with cfn-init, maybe having no functions or commands at all. And then subsequently you can update your CloudFormation template and then manually run the cfn-init inside your EC2 instance. So once you get all your commands up and running, once they start working, you can then start compiling everything together into one CloudFormation template. As you can see that there's another error. So this is like 03 run test1 failed. So let's see what is the problem. I think it failed because it's trying to create a PowerShell this file again when it already exists. So let's go into the logs files. So logs should be here. Log cfn-init. So if I go here, then it should have some errors that it's saying the file test1 already exists. So the reason for this one is that in the first run of cfn-init, this already got created, and in the subsequent run, you need to have this new item. When you create it, you need to force the PowerShell output in a way that it recreates this file. So if it's an obvious bug, but you can now know how to test this one when it gets executed by cfn-init. If you want to create a file or download a file and install it, the best approach is to use the file section of cfn-init. So if you look at here, I have this installer file, right, which is I'm downloading the AWS CLI. As you can see, when I execute multiple times this this cfn-init, if this file is coming as part of the file section of your CloudFormation template, now for example, if you look at this metadata, you will find that in the prerequisites I have one of the file that I'm downloading is so these are all commands, and here I have files. So one of the file I'm downloading is this AWS CLI into C installer AWS CLI v2. So when you are downloading this, file, it can download multiple times. Now, for example, when you run the cfn-init first time, it will download as C installers AWS CLI v2 MSI. Because it is in the file section of your cfn-init related metadata, when you run the cfn-init next time, maybe as part of the CloudFormation initialization or update, or you run several updates, in this case I ran 2 updates, this file will be renamed as a back file. So if you go into your this folder, you can find the previously downloaded file. If you look at the timestamp, you can derive when these files got created. And the final one is here, AWS CLI v2. So what did we learn today? We learned what cfn-init is, where to find it, and how to use it in your CloudFormation template. But these are obvious things. You can find it clearly in AWS documentation. But more importantly, we spend our time on learning how to improve the productivity when you are developing CloudFormation template with cfn-init. So some of the tips I discuss are how to pre-provision all the dependencies related to an EC2 instance and focus only on one EC2 instance at a time. That will help you to quickly debug EC2 instance related artifacts. The next one we discuss is how to use default values in your CloudFormation template parameters. That will assist you when you try to execute this CloudFormation template manually. If you decide to use let's say the console application instead of using command line or PowerShell. We also discuss how to use PowerShell or command line to deploy update CloudFormation template. so that you don't need to manually click through the console to deploy this CloudFormation template. You also learn how to manually execute the cfn-init until you fix the bug, and then use user data section. So here this is very important, so you don't need to run cfn-init through user data. As I showed before, cfn-init is an exe which you can manually execute. So once you fix all the bugs related to cfn-init, you can then include that one in user data section and then do a final execution to test whether your CloudFormation is working. We also learn how to use cfn-init logs. So this is where all the commands that you executed in defined in the metadata section of your CloudFormation template get dumped. So this is a good way to check what happens when your cfn-init get executed and what errors it produces. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video so far, please thumbs up this video and subscribe to our channel, and it will help us to grow this channel and continuously produce awesome cloud related videos. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comment section, and there are some useful information I have posted in the description section.